Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dana Herman. I serve as Associate Director here at the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati. And the AJA is very, very pleased to co-sponsor this event this afternoon with the Clow Library. My special thanks to Abigail Bacon for organizing this and putting it all together so wonderfully. And to hear my friend, Rabbi Dr. Zev Eleff, who has served as president of Gratz College in Philadelphia since June of 2021. He was previously chief academic officer of Hebrew Theological College and vice provost of Touro College, Illinois. Rabbi Dr. Zev Eleff has written over 120 articles and is the author or editor of 14 books, including Modern Orthodox Judaism, a documentary history, Dyed in Crimson, Football, Faith, and Remaking Harvard's America, and Who Rules the Synagogue, Religious Authority and the Formation of American Judaism, which I believe was the basis for his doctoral dissertation. Dr. Eleff received his Ph.D. from Brandeis University and his MA from Teachers College, Columbia University. He received his rabbinic ordination from the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, and he is a past Wexner Graduate Fellow, Davidson Scholar, a prestigious program for Jewish leaders and professionals. But more importantly, he is a former fellow of the American Jewish Archives and a wonderful friend of our institution. And I'm so pleased that he could be with us here today. So I'm going to pass it over to Zev.
No, thanks, Dana and Abigail. You know that Dana authored that introduction and not me, because I would have said I earned my PhD at the American Jewish Archives, because in truth, there's really no other repository and stewardship that does that much to facilitate the scholarship of American Jewish studies writ large. To speak with friends, I see a number of them here. Hi, Jason. But the CLOW and AJA, two really peerless institutions for Jewish learning, serious Jewish learning, which is unfortunate because I'm going to only talk about silly things moving forward. But I really can't say enough about the Cincinnati campus writ large. My only regret, I was telling Dana and Abigail a moment ago, the reason why I'm not in Cincinnati with all of you is because happily my wife gave birth to our fourth child. Little Atara was born this time last week, so we thought it was safe to do this by Zoom. Safe for my marriage, certainly. And what I would be remiss, therefore, not to apologize to myself that usually when I'm in Cincinnati, I get to go rummage through some of the archives and maybe prepare for another bucka. Thank you. In any case, really, really grateful to share some ideas with you in the spirit of Saul Lieberman. This is the history of nonsense, and the history of nonsense is scholarship. I'll share my screen because I will challenge, hopefully, in 45 minutes or less, the notion that this is nonsense, that there is something about the Purim Shpiel, these plays, which I understand HUC students and faculty still put on. It may be the only rabbinical program I know that has decades and decades of consecutive renditions of a Purim Shpiel moving forward. They're really uninterrupted, which is an amazing thing. Deserves its own history, perhaps. The basis, Purim Shpiel really begins, as we'll see, in the 19th century, but it has precursors. So, for example, and these are items I'm happy to showcase from the Clow Library, is a lately better known text called Masechet Purim, which is a spoof of things. Here you see that it's listing in the Clow Library, Masechet Purim. This is an edition from Venice. Just to scroll through a few of these from the medieval period here from the 13th century. A spoof off of the Ethics of Our Fathers of Pirkei Avot, Chabkuk, right, a prophet who flourished before the destruction of the first temple, Kibel Torah Mikarmi. That this, not a altogether overly remarkable prophet. Habakkuk received the Torah, the tradition, from Carmi. What is Carmi? Carmi means vineyard. Umasrua lenoach, and pass it on. These are not your typical chains in the tradition from Masechet Avot. Noach to Lot, right? Two very flawed figures. Vilot la'achei Yosef, to the brothers of Joseph. So they had a sense of humor in the medieval period. And the brothers of Joseph, Achei Yosef, Leneva Carmeli, again, a playoff of Carmi. And then it continues on and on. But what is this business about Habakkuk? Take a look where my cursor is right now. Matni, right? Using traditional rabbinic formulations. Let's challenge this Mishnah. Matni lahu Rav Bibi l'Rav Achad boy. Habakkuk kibel miTorah mikarmi. Amar le, Habakkuk Shemo? Is Habakkuk really his name? V'halo, Bakbuk Shemo. It's not Habakkuk. It's really Bakbuk, a bottle of alcohol. Shana Amar, and it offers Bubnei, Bakbuk, Amar le, Ain, Mekoshe. We won't go any further than that. But you see that they have a sense of humor that this Purim Torah, again, housed in the Cloud Library, that Bakbuk, that the bottle, has a strong tradition. Alcohol is a strong tradition from Sinai, and of course, alcohol is featured writ large during the Purim holiday. A few other texts just to highlight for a moment. They're just fascinating. Here's the call number of, again, a lesser known work, Sefer Habakkuk Hanavi, the book of Habakkuk the prophet. So again, sort of in the ether. Sefer Habakkuk, and this idea over here, Vayihi Dvar Hashem El Bakbuk Hanavi Lemor, they dispatch with the chet, with the first letter, and now it's all about the bottle of alcohol, which is some sort of, it portends as some sort of prophet in the medieval period. Finally, Haggadah. So Haggadah is usually co-signed to Passover, but here is Haggadah Lulel Shikurim, the Haggadah for the night, not of Passover, but the night of drunkenness. A whole rules and regulation of how to behave and why is this night different than all other nights, principally because everybody's drinking all at once and they're consumed by it. And then Lashana Haba, Nishana Kfalim, that on hopefully next year, instead of Lashana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, it is a promise that next year we'll drink double. Here in America, I'm most qualified to respond to scholarly inquiries that end with the words "in America," and this is also materials that was provided by Lisa and Ho in the American Jewish Archives. Is the Purim Gazette, a publication that ran for the New York Purim Association from the 1860s until the 1890s. Here's one from the 1880s. This was not a funny document. Mary Purim writes this editorial with customary greetings. With this customary greeting, you are bidden welcome to our festival. Mary Purim is no empty sound. Without worrying you as to events of thousands of years ago, we simply ask that you keep in mind the record of our society, which founded in 1862, is now in its 20th year. It's a solicitation. And the like. This entire Purim Gazette, though, is not filled like the jocular stuff of the medieval period, but rather with edifying editorials and culture items that would be of interest to high society, New York, Jew, and otherwise. That was this Purim Gazette was distributed at the annual Purim Ball, which this massive event that would take place by the end at Madison Square Garden, would invite the mayor, the chief of police, all of the elites, and was sort of New York Judaism's contribution to high society life every Purim time. And for those interested, would also have a schedule of the start times of Shabbat and the Jewish holidays as well. It was a keepsake. It was an heirloom that they would distribute at this very reputable program. Not at all funny, meant to be quite serious and fancy. A fancy dress ball is what it was called. But all these are important to understand how this curious thing, the Purim Shpiel, the Purim play, the Purim pantomime, the Purim soliloquy, it takes on many different things at many different times, how it starts, and that begins in the early 19th century. Here is a report by Mayor Eisenstadt from the Hebrew language journal HUC-JIR in March 1916, Misaprim. He quotes the following tradition, and it's quoted. This is the most elaborate version of it, but there are many sources which indicate the genesis of the Purim play, the Purim Shpiel. Misaper. It's the following is told. Shemisadash shel yeshiva hazot. That upon the founding of the Eitz Chaim yeshiva in Volozhin, known as the Volozhin yeshiva, its founder, Hagaon HaTzadik Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who Talmido shel Hagaon Hagra Vilna, who was a student of the leading rabbinic figure, the Gaon of Vilna, Rabbi Elijah Kramer, and the founding of the yeshiva is most considered to be 1802. Asher HaYeshiva Hayita Nikrit al Shemo Eitz Chaim. This yeshiva was known as Eitz Chaim, but not really. It was known as the yeshiva in Volozhin. V'hu Haya Nikra al Shem Ha'ir Yeshiva Volozhin, and he was known, was Reb Chaim, and the yeshiva too was known as a modest-sized city, the yeshiva in Volozhin. Who shekava et haminhag hazeh shel Purim Rav. It's at this yeshiva that the Purim rabbi or Purim gabbai tradition was established. And it was Reb Chaim Volozhiner himself who established it. It was not a student-driven program. It was led by the Menahel, the leader of the yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshiva. Why did he do it? Why did he want a Purim rabbi, sort of a cold open for a Saturday Night Live, as you can imagine? Rotza Hayaladat. Rabbi Chaim Volozhin wanted to know at the Chisronot Shaban Hagat Yeshiva. He was a very good college administrator. He wanted to understand how we could improve. He wanted a form of an assessment tool to understand and receive student feedback on how to improve his school. Asher hu lo amad alehem v'som talmid lo hirhiv la'ir oto alehem lefikach kava yom echad b'shana. He couldn't really ask for feedback. These were dutiful students who revered Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin. So if he were just to sit at a table, if he were to, they didn't have a dormitory or a cafeteria, but if he were to hold a meeting at one of the boarders' homes to get feedback, they wouldn't respond with any trenchant criticism that would be constructive. They would likely say, "This is the best thing in the world. We're so grateful to be here, dear Rosh Yeshiva." So how could he somehow get feedback to improve this newfangled thing called the modern yeshiva? Modern in that sense of time. Lefikach, kava yom echad b'shana, once a year, Yom HaPurim, on Purim, shebo hitiru lahem gam chazal lehitpader, that rabbis from thousands of years ago permitted a certain level of conviviality. Sha'az yihiyeh adam hatamidim b'meshach kol yom chofshi b'ma'asav lishlit levado b'nyanei ha'yeshiva hagata. He would appoint one student who represented the collective, who would receive notes from the others in the student body. Umemela yitboru az ha'ma'asim she'inam ritzuyim shel harav mikol hashana. And in lampooning, as a one-person show, they would invariably, these Purim rabbis, provide feedback in their skit, in whatever their presentation would be, for the rabbi of all year round, Rabbi Chaim Volozhin. And he thus, therefore, figured out, Achar kach letakin et ha'movot ulahazhir mibli lehinageach ba'lavo, and he would make the necessary corrections to improve the yeshiva. You can get a lot. That's the purpose of satire, perhaps, is through comedy, learn a certain level, open up a window of truth. Notice that it's once a year, because if it's not once a year, he's inviting a Pandora's box of chaos. If he understands, and the yeshiva allows for this controlled chaos of once per annum, that there was going to be a Purim skit, a Purim rabbi, a Purim Shpiel, then the expectations are that it's going to be very fun. It's going to be very entertaining for a 24-hour period, for a 2 hour, whatever, however long the day, the window of opportunity lasts. But then the next day, everything returns back to normal. And that was the control that Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin placed on his new Purim Shpiel tradition. People, it really caught on. So the author of the Tiferet Yisrael, a major commentary on the Mishnah, Rabbi Yaakov Lifshitz, who wrote a multi-volume memoir, Odeni Zochar Bioledati, I remember from my youth, he writes, Kishashabo, Kama Talmidim Lehorehem, Al Yemei Chag HaMatzot, when Volozhin would dismiss for the semester, all the students would return back home for Passover. Hayu kama nichbadim gedolei Torah v'hamalamim anim lishma me'am parshat drashat harav chadash ba'oto apur. Everybody stopped them at the train station. Tell us about the Purim Shpiel. Tell us about the Purim Rabbi. This was the talk of the town. And it would spread and spread, and this is what people looked for. And the students would memorize, would pay very much mind on the antics of the Purim Shpiel, so they could appropriately relay the information to the very interested townspeople when they returned to wherever they lived in Eastern Europe. Now, a story this I'll tell aloud. Is that it continued well beyond Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who dies, I believe, in 1820, passes the leadership baton to his son, Rabbi Yitzchak of Volozhin, and they appoint a very brilliant student, Mordechai Gimpel Yaffa, not yet Rabbi Mordechai Gimpel Yaffa, and he actually does not get Siskel and Ebert's 2 thumbs up. To the contrary, in this memoir, we find that he delivered a complete lecture where he seemed to offer a very traditional approach. There was a passage from the Jerusalem Talmud, from the Talmud Yerushalmi. There was a passage from Maimonides, from the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, and he reconciled them in traditional rabbinic form. And the students looked at Rabbi Yitzchak, and they asked, what gives? We were supposed to be treated to a funny show. And Rabbi Yitzchak responded, Omnam Kain, you're right. It wasn't that interesting. Everything was rather traditional. Everything was rather informed. No different than how I would deliver a lecture. Aval Zutzara. But there's one problem. Harambam by Yerushalmi Shalehem Nivna Apilpul Hazeh Shtehem Lo Hayuv Lo Nivra. He made up the Rambam and the Yerushalmi. So he had a different take, Rabbi Mordechai Gimpel Yaffa, when he had his turn as the Purim rabbi. He thought it was good enough to make up the passages. He didn't want to focus on anything to do with the yeshiva in particular. Now, the Purim Shpiel does crash and burn. It does come to a rather strange ending in the yeshiva in Volozhin. And that's with the emergence of the second wife, a second wife of the longtime Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, known as the Nitziv. Just around the time that the Nitziv's first wife had passed away, there was a apparently very strikingly beautiful woman named Batya Miriam. And what happened was, this is Rabbi Meir Berlin's memoir, in which he writes about his mother, that she was actually married before. She was a divorcee. Why? Because Kishigia Legil Shel Shiduchim, Rabo Haftzim, Batya Miriam. When she became of marriageable age, apparently everyone wanted to court this young woman, Batya Miriam. Mivchar Batei Avot, from the choicest of homes, Mituvei HaBacharim, Migdolei HaAshirim, the finest young rabbinical scholars, the sons of the wealthiest people in Lithuanian Jewry, Haita Yafa Ad Ma'od, because she was so strikingly beautiful, Ubalat Fechal Tov, and was quite brilliant, V'nimusim Naim, Mishkal Lefi HaMusei Hashanim Ahin, and she was witty and she had good character. And what else? Banana Ivrit, Likro Lichtov, she knew Hebrew, Yada Sfat Rusit, she knew Russian, Bapeh, by heart, trying to write it. V'gam ikira b'mida zuyemet al sfaha gamanit. She knew German. Achlu hayadia lahoreha, but she made it known to her parents. Ki lo laosher v'lo lenoy. She didn't care about utilizing her qualities for wealth or for trinkets. Lolitan gubanaz. So she only wanted one thing in a marriage. Chavtza v'rtzuna ki ba'ala yeh tamid chacham v'osek b'torah lezeh kol oda. She just wanted to marry a brilliant Torah scholar. Afa pichein nitradcha tzerachad ben asher muflag be'ir Chernigo. Still, her parents, knowing that a dowry was important, married her off to a wealthy young man. And this man was no slacker, Adam Kasher Vahagun. He was a very fine man, good character. V'gamhu v'gamhu rav hivtichu. They promised, this young man did, as well as his parents, ki yaktish man l'torah, v'hi roi li'ishto l'tziyara l'drishta. Promised, this young man will study. He'll do daf yomi. It wasn't daf yomi yet. You get the point. V'lo avri yamim rabim v'isha akira b'bal. But she was no dummy, was Bati Miriam, certainly not. It didn't take long, a few months, weeks, days maybe into marriage. Ki omnam hu yoshev v'lomed. Her young husband would sit and learn. And he would open a couple of books from his prodigious library about ein chachmat Torah bikir, but he just couldn't cut it. He was never going to get tenure. Ve'ein kishono, ve'ein nafsha liyadiyah that Torah liyod lamben. He was never going to be a great learner. And it became known. And if you take a look at the last line, Bati Miriam demanded a divorce because she did not want to live in a chaye amaratzos. She did not want to be married to somebody who was less than a stellar Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar. So she was available. And we know from we know from her brother, Rabbi Baruch Alevi Epstein, the Makar Baruch, author of the Torah Tamima, that that when she married the Nitziv, she found a Talmud Chacham many years her senior, and that brings us to the end of the Boluzhin Purim Shpiel tradition. What happened? She showed up to Volozhin, married just before Purim of a particular year in the 1880s, and the Purim rabbi, it was none terribly popular in the yeshiva. He was seen as the rival of his own relation, Rabbi Chaim Brisker, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, but suffice it to say, the sight of the Rosh Yeshiva being an older man, being married to a beautiful young woman was fodder for that year's Purim Shpiel. And when the Purim rabbi got up and did his Shpiel, Amar, Ki al Dodi b'Nisuav Ela Yeshli Froash, Yeshli Lefaresh, et Amar Zivug Sheni Lefi Maasa. So he made a quick joke based on the Talmud at the very beginning of Masachet Sota that it's assumed, according to the sages, that while your first match is ordained by God, a second match, if that's the way your life leads you, your second marriage, zivug sheni lefi ma'asav, your second marriage is not preordained, but it's based on your own actions. Kilomar mishu mechonim b'ma'asim tovim. Whoever has a lot of good deeds accrued, betov lifnei ha zocha lezivug sheni. So that's it, because he was a good guy, deserved to marry Bati Miriam. Bati Miriam did not like that, and she promptly told her husband that this will be the last Purim Shpiel, and the Nitziv followed suit, and that was the last Purim Shpiel in Volozhin around 1884, 1885. Want to get to America is that 1 year, just a good point of interest, is that it also made its way to Israel, where in Merkaz Harav, the chief rabbi who was then known as Palestine, Rabbi Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Cook had a Purim Shpiel, and there was somebody apparently who really got him with a lot of zingers, who he found out was actually Rabbi Yitzchak Harif, who was a descendant of the Nitziv. And when people looked to Rav Kook, he was laughing and he said, "Oh, you know what? I get it, because I really made fun of the Nitziv when I was a young man in Volozhin, and now God has a sense of humor apparently too. And so now the family, the descendants of the Nitziv are getting back at me. It's my comeuppance." But eventually, the European yeshiva is no longer, because of the Holocaust and the Nazis. Made their memories be erased. Gamla America. And so, in an article in Hadoar, the Hebrew language American journal, newspaper, really, Gamla America Boam and Hagima'ela, these traditions eventually migrate to the United States and what now is known as Yeshiva University, Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, and also he gives an illustration as an example, the Yeshiva in Lakewood, based Medrash Gavoa, founded by Rabbi Aaron Cutler in 1943. YU had its own interesting Purim tradition. Yeah, they had a school newspaper, which is quite unlike any other yeshiva, certainly, but YU is unlike any other yeshiva, perhaps, to date. You see some of the headlines from the 1960s. Hartstein names Billy Graham as new yeshiva president. Okay. Kashrut King of tuna fish fame sent on 3-year Samoan sabbatical. This is Rabbi Moshe Tendler, who argued that tuna was not kosher, to the chagrin of many. Most people think that tuna is kosher. And then perhaps maybe the most amusing, but maybe not most family-friendly headline, President Belkin at Yeshiva University on the third image. Belkin announces new school, Sokol. Now, it's not just double entendre, not just School of Business, SOB, to open in fall. Purim Shpiels were also really important. So when Albert Einstein permitted yeshiva to open a medical school leveraging his name and legacy, he and one of the more hard-line European Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yerachim Gorelick, were featured in a Purim Shpiel in the 1950s. The commentator in a memoir, that was the name of the newspaper, always had a faculty censor in those days, not anymore, I don't think. And apparently that censor took issue later on when they confiscated an issue of the commentator. And so the students decided there would be no Purim commentator that year. This is part of a Lampoon tradition. Many colleges had their Lampoon edition on April 1st. Yeshiva, understanding that it also had a rabbinic tradition, tied their annual Lampoon issue to Purim, not to April Fool's Day. Another good example of how it migrates in the Orthodox fold, and then I want to share a few from HUC traditions, which are quite really revealing. And again, it's this tradition that a Purim Shpiel, a Purim rabbi, a Purim skit is meant to be that controlled chaos where everything is guaranteed to return back to normal the next day, but that window is instructional, and it's a good window into assessment how to improve the yeshiva. Here you can see that not too far away from Cincinnati is Chicago. There is a jump. A lot of you will probably say, well, what happened then? And others of you will know exactly what it is that there's draft dodging, that students are matriculating into all rabbinical programs in the late 60s, early 1970s to avoid the Vietnam War. And here is the enrollment trends at the Hebrew Theological College in Chicago. They took it really seriously in Chicago, and they loved their musical, apparently. So not Sinatra, but Bye Bye Beardy features in 1964, not West Side Story, but when the HTC moves from the West Side to the northern suburbs, it's then reimagined as North Side Story. And I won't sing from Put on a Happy Face from Bye Bye Birdie, but you see here, Joseph Abad is the name of the dean of the college at the time, and you see that here. You won't find this in any other archival records, but here they admit. So you might be conscripted. This idea that if you leave the yeshiva, you're somehow, not somehow, you are going to be drafted into the Vietnam War was a looming idea which only manifested audibly at things like the Purim Shpiel. So this moment of truth. This was a Wizard of Odd, is what they called it. And it was take a look. People came out. In one report, 1,200 people came to see the HTC Purim Spiel that the students would spend a lot of time crafting and perfecting until it would come Purim time. Here, Rabbi Isaac Klein, I don't know why his archives are at the University of Buffalo, and I'm not aware that the Jewish Theological Seminary ever had a Purim Spiel tradition, but apparently it did have an underground one, and its leading halachic, so the longtime leader of the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards was Rabbi Isaac Klein, who actually battled with Rabbi Tendler about tuna and swordfish and whether or not it was kosher. He would draft all sorts of humorous Torah in the tradition of Volozhin, but he also apparently in that middle item, not exactly the most legible, would had his notes from when there were skits done by the students, performed by the students at the Jewish Theological Seminary, but I understand not an official one. And this brings me to Cincinnati. And there was this sense that the Purim Spiel, that sense if you're going to be a rabbinical school, even if you're not going to be though you're not going to be an Orthodox one, like the yeshiva in Volozhin, or like Lakewood, or Tells in Cleveland, or the Hebrew Theological College, an Orthodox rabbinical seminary in Chicago, the idea that you're a rabbinical school, your authenticity, your bona fides, are somehow proven out by the fact that your students are putting on a Purim Spiel. You're not an authentic yeshiva. You're not an authentic center of rabbinic learning unless you put on a Purim Spiel. And that's exactly what the HUC students did as early as the 1930s. And here you see that I really started to offer their criticism and say things out loud that perhaps they wouldn't do on any other occasion throughout the year. So this is from, I believe, 1936, just before the Columbus Platform, which would reintroduce Zionism as an acceptable plank in Reform Jewish faith. And here, there's also this idea, it's quite disturbing, actually, is this constantly in multiple spiels referring to the boys as goys, as non-Jews, as Gentiles, somehow accepting this lesser than. Really good. If I were a psychoanalyst, I would perhaps feel more comfortable relaying thoughts about this. But this you see throughout the HUC Purim spiels that there is this idea of people questioning their own authenticity, their Jewishness, their status as rabbis, as cultivators of Jewish learning. And so you see the word goy being substituted for boy. Also, the fact that these are not boys, these are men, young men. Nevertheless, you do see here, whether you dine at the plaza or at the kitty mit dem fiddle, you will rub shoulders with one of our goys. If it's an afternoon dinner talk, a peace talk, an anti-Zionist talk, or a talk on the elephant and the Jewish problem. Another spiel, and you really see where their politics lie. This one, well, we'll see what perhaps one of the other men can swing it. Shimshi, enter Shimshi. I yield to you. Well, we'll see what a little faith and reason can do. You remember me? You're Shimshi, the bird fancier. That's right. I want you to marry me. What are your conditions? If you marry me, you must have nothing to do with Kaplan. Pretty sure they're referring to Mordechai Kaplan. Who is a really important figure in American Jewish life, is no longer that active at the seminary, but is beginning to found what would eventually become Reconstructionist Judaism. He's a fairly good orator, but he leaves out the L. Israel without L isn't Israel anymore. And so you have this idea in the 1940s where Israel, not quite Israel yet, it's still Palestine, um, Israel is a something. Reform Judaism is allowed to support Israel. Kaplan, who has done much to mute uh, a personal God in Jewish faith. He is an ardent Zionist, is Mordechai Kaplan, but it's questionable about his belief in God, apparently. And so here you have a little nod is that at least we are now Zionists. He says he's a Zionist, but he leaves out El, which is the name of God from Israel. And then to move my Zoom controls for a brief moment. Um, Here, they know their history of Reform Judaism really well. Mr. Hilchpick proposed at that time the seemingly fantastic scheme of making Australia our Palestine and Sydney our Jerusalem, which I say, of course, but maybe not everybody knows it, is that Gustavus Poznansky in Charleston, South Carolina, uh, in in the 1841, I think, announces that when Beth Elohim in Charleston rebuilt their sanctuary, Poznansky, their rabbinic leader, announces, "This is our Jerusalem and this country, uh, our our Israel, our Palestine." The idea that America can be holy and that we are embracing uh, at fully America as our home. We are renouncing our allegiance to any return to Zion, explains Poznansky. And so by this time, Jacob Rader Marcus was in full force in teaching rabbinical students in Cincinnati all about American Jewish history. So they understood in their lampoon that they were going to draw on Poznansky's adage, which really set in motion in many ways. The Reform, it was known as the cradle of Reform Judaism. So that this made it in really tells you about their literacy of the Reform movement and how much they absorbed and how much they inserted into their discussions, how it made it into their Purim skit. So not every skit had to do with HUC politics. Here was a skit that actually centered on the Purim story, was a dialogue between Haman, and Esther. Oh yeah, listen, I'm a Litvak, and I wasn't born yesterday. The Litvak, good Litvak joke. Haman responds, "Why, you don't believe I was serious, Esther?" This is after Esther accuses Haman of plotting to kill the Jewish people. "Some of my best friends are Jews, and I'm even a member of Wise Temple." Of course, Isaac Mayer Wise Temple in Cincinnati. The jester, "Oh, that's because he expects cut rates on the cemetery." Apparently, that's an inside joke for people who get Cincinnati synagogue politics. Esther, "It's no use. Achashverosh, the king of Shushan, will have to choose between us." Haman, have a heart, Esther. You women can twist any man around your fingers. You know I haven't a chance. A little bit later on in the skit, "Why, Esther, are you a Jew?" What do I look like? A Swede?" Haman, honest, Esther, I didn't mean to kill you. You're a white Jew. The ones I want to kill are fellows like Mordechai. And so the idea of race both is the whiteness of the Jewish community, but also thinking about politics in America at the time makes its way and it manifests in the dialogue in the Shpiel, and the students are able to capture some of their ideas and what the tensions that they're dealing with inside of this humorous skit. Kaplan, though, apparently was on everybody's mind. Let's do something on a national scale. Let's Kaplanize him. That might be a Wise, probably referring to Stephen S. Wise. There were much talks about mergers, eventually were, between Wise's seminary and Hebrew Union College. This idea that Wise and Kaplan loom large on the national scene, and they're thinking about it in those terms. Again, something about the self-confidence of HUC students. This is between two professors, Gutman and Marcus, Jacob Rader Marcus, of course. "Did you hear about the Orthodox rabbis who visited my Shulchan Aruch, it's Code of Jewish Law, from 16th century class the other day?" Was I embarrassed. Why? What happened? The class was unprepared. How could you tell the difference? One of the boys, interesting, boys again, not men, was reading the text upside down. Sometimes it's better that way. I often stand on my head too to read the text. Also interesting to note in Cincinnati, because I know we have a bunch of Cincinnati folks here, is the leading Orthodox rabbinic figure at the time was Rabbi Eliezer Silver, who had really no truck for HUC, and the idea that he could put it into cherem, into excommunication, but also you would see here, besides it would transgress the Pittsburgh platform, this idea that these students realize they're heirs to a very rich Reformed tradition. They're noting Poznansky. They're commenting, at least indirectly, to the Columbus platform earlier on, and that they are well aware of the 1885 Pittsburgh platform, which would canonize Reform Rabbinic Creed. These are really important, that they're absorbing these traditions, and they're talking about them in the Purim Shpiel. A note written in a Shpiel: dear faculty, read the student body petition. The graduation exercise be held on Saturday morning, May 27th at 9 instead from in the afternoon. This is not an ideal whim. We have cogent reasons for asking it. Normally, we could sleep late Shabbos morning. Interesting, Shabbos, right? So you're seeing not Sabbath, but you're seeing Shabbos much more of a Yiddishism, introducing Eastern European extracts into HUC. You're seeing it manifest there. But with all the families and visitors present on graduation day, it is too much noisy to sleep. And they talk about it that way, and they talk about David Phillips and Heller, and two leading rabbinic figures, James Heller at the time at Cincinnati. Go on. Purim Shpiel, because I want to make sure that we have time for questions and comments, rebuttals, make its way. Here, the Orthodox Union writes to the congregations about how to do a Purim Shpiel in the synagogue. And there are likewise similar guidelines for Hillels, for other synagogues, for day schools, for JCCs. Even the Jewish press has, to my knowledge, two spoof lampoons. In not the Jewish press, they announced the Messiah has arrived, and then a little bit uncouth, Sadat alive is after he's assassinated, after the Camp David Accords. The Purim Shpiel, though, outside of Cincinnati, apparently, has really fell on hard times. At Torah Vidas, a leading Orthodox, right-wing Orthodox rabbinical program in Brooklyn, Rabbi Avraham Pam really had no patience for the antics of a Purim Shpiel. And here, in a Dear Abby column in a Lakewood newspaper that was penned by one of the editors of Art Scroll, Rabbi Nussin Sherman, he advises against having a Purim Shpiel in an all-girls Beis Yaakov school, and testifies that in Torah Vidas, the Purim Shpiel had been canceled already. And even in Chicago, where they had all of those fancy costumes and those parodies off of Broadway musicals, by 1981, the students, in some sort of revenge for the canceled Purim Shpiel, the yearbook, instead of having a full page spread on the Purim Shpiel of that prior academic year, instead announced that it was canceled, which apparently meant that Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin's trick, his educational strategy for assessment for the sake of improvement, had finally run its course. That in America, and maybe America had moved in a certain direction, maybe certain rabbinical programs had moved in a certain direction. I'll leave it for others to determine which way. But the Purim Shpiel could no longer be satisfactorily a small controlled window of chaos to learn a little bit more of how to improve all conditions in a rabbinical school. A lot of Shpiel, I say most, a number of yeshivas now recorded by video, and it's previewed by the administration beforehand. But that longstanding tradition of Purim Shpiels that really began with the yeshiva in the Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Volozhin at the behest of its founder, Rabbi Chaim Volozhin. Ironically, perhaps, its most long-standing descendant of that tradition is none other than Hebrew Union College. Who would have thought? Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. That was a fascinating presentation. We'll take some questions in the chat. I'll get things started. I was wondering if you know what were the kinds of things that people complained about in those earliest Purim Shpiels, like what were their criticisms of the yeshiva system?
Right, not the much younger and beautiful wives of the Rosh Yeshiva. I assume that was a unique instance. We don't really know what they complained about. Those traditions haven't been passed down to us, but we can imagine that they were pretty trenchant. That the yeshiva in Volozhin had a variegated bunch of people. Bialik eventually was a student there much later, but they all had different views, and this was a lively experiment. This modern yeshiva. Before then, you did not have a central place of learning. You had little smaller hubs in Eastern Europe. So there was much to experiment about, whether it be how the students, if they were making fun of how the teachers delivered their Talmud lectures, or what the food might have been like at the borders. You can imagine that, but we don't really have that. If we find it, I'll be happy to share the next time around. It's a good question.
And so you've never come across any like specific script
Of the
or
Shpiels, no.
anecdote?
Unfortunately, there was no American Jewish archives for Volozhin.
We have a question or comment here from Leora that Israel's Eretz Nehederet, the Saturday Night Live, and the Daily Show are current examples of making difficult times humorous satire.
And we welcome it, right? We welcome it, even though we live in a very complicated time. We all look, whether live or if you're like me, you just find the YouTube recording of Saturday Night Live with the Daily Show. We need it. It's a bomb. It's an elixir, and humor has that value. So that's absolutely correct.
And her comment is that she's heard that the Megillah itself was supposed to be a kind of satire. So is that really the original tradition for the idea of making a political situation more tolerable? Or
in no doubt the Megillah has comedy, right? When Achash, there's no question that the authors of Megillah Esther had something funny in mind when for example, when Achashverosh kills off his wife Vashti, and this idea and promulgates the decree that from now on the wives have to listen to their husbands. Right, there's something humorous going on there. There's political satire going on in Megillat Esther in real time. It's also it's an exciting story. So, for example, the rabbis teach us that while you are generally not allowed to have, let's say, two Torah readings occur simultaneously in the same room, because you can't hear it, Trey Kole Lo Ishtame, you can't hear two voices simultaneously. When you're listening to the scroll of Esther, you have very focused attention on it. So even if it's being chanted twice in the same room, you do fulfill your mitzvah of listening to the Megillah and Purim, because you're going to pay so much attention to such an exciting, adventurous screenplay. And that's so. I think, Abigail, I think you're right. Is that the comment is absolutely correct that the Purim story is always linked to the selling of Joseph by his brothers. It made itself into Megillah Purim. It has a little entry there. Exciting stories that usually rouse a certain interest and I guess myriad thoughts about it. Action, excitement, and comedy.
We have a question from Jamie Marks about how the musical aspects of Purim Shpiels, when did that get introduced? And I'm assuming that there weren't musical numbers in the Volozhin Shpiel.
You remember, so the Shpiels were one, in this case, shows in Eastern Europe. You don't get a full ensemble until later on, and it's very much the product of the rise of Broadway. Absolutely. So the fact that we're seeing in the 40s and 50s and 60s, Rodgers Hammerstein and the whole bit, it's only natural that it be introduced. And some of those, the ones from Chicago, are very, very entertaining.
Did those become less entertaining to the communities as the communities became less involved in the schools and didn't, necessarily catch the jokes? Like,
I
did it
think
become a little too insular?
I think to the contrary is that community saw this is maybe this is I'm just thinking of this right now because of the question is the community saw the Shpiel as an opportunity to enter in to become insiders at least for a moment. It was the duty of the actors and the writers of these Shpiels to make not to play too much inside baseball, but to make it accessible. The fact that the HUC Shpiels didn't just focus on what the laundry room looked like at HUC, but instead talked about major issues, both in terms of people like Phillips and Heller, who were the rabbinic leaders in Cincinnati, but also broadening it even more fully to the business of not just Wise and Kaplan, but Abba Hillel Silver, particularly, who was this major figure, was a Zionist in the Reform movement that did much to bring about what I talked about, the Columbus platform and Reform Judaism's so-called return to Zionism. The fact that these Shpiels waxed hysterical on these prominent figures showed how much the students found themselves as part of a broader national discourse, and they made sure the Shpiels were accented by that.
I thought it was very fascinating seeing those pictures of women in the audience at the Purim Shpiels, because women, especially in the Orthodox yeshivas, are not really welcome into those very male-dominated spaces. They can't even relate to probably most of the jokes or even the way that the whole yeshiva system is set up as being, they're maybe mothers of the students, but they have no kind of firsthand direct experience, but yet they were welcomed and included in the celebration, which I thought was pretty interesting. Do we have any other questions? And if anybody wants, they can also unmute themselves in order to ask, or you can put your question in the chat. No, all right, then let's wrap up. Oh, well, we have one question here. When Shpiel ended at the hand of
when they invited, right, that was the Bati Miriam story, I guess. When did Shpiels travel to a congregation is a really interesting question. As far as I can tell, it was a useful pedagogical device for on Hanukkah and Purim to have these cantatas and plays that would perform, not always very funny, but in order to improve Jewish child literacy, they would put on a play of the Purim story, for example. So synagogue schools always had these traditions, really I've seen them as early as the 1910s. Maybe go earlier. So it was a natural thing for these theatrical things to move forward into Shpiel-like comedy routines. We have to collect more and see when it was, but certainly by the post-war period, these were de jure in congregations of all types in the United States. And dressing up in costume is a long-standing tradition. You see that in fancy dress balls of the 1860s in New York, which would eventually move to Philadelphia, to Columbus, to Kalamazoo. Purim balls were a major event taken up by sisterhoods. The ones in New York were led by men, which is quite interesting. The idea of dressing up in costume goes back to the medieval period, if not earlier.
I should also just put in a pitch. If anybody is from a congregation that has archives of their old Purim Shpiels or affiliated with any schools, you should make sure you get those over to Dana at the archives so that they can include it in their collection there. All right, I just want to thank you very much, Dr. Eleff. This was a really fascinating line of inquiry. Thank you for enlightening all of us and for making our Purim week more festive. So thank you, everybody. And this lecture will be up on our YouTube channel if you'd like to share it with anyone. And we'll hope to see you next time.
Have a happy Purim, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.